Hello, my name is Sergio Castillo and I am an atheist. I became an atheist when I was about 16 years old, and it had to do a lot with my rejection of all of the mainline religions, ranging from Christianity to Judaism to Islam to Hinduism to Buddhism even, which I do consider more philosophy but religious in nature. And I'm not sure that I'm alone here in where I live. I live currently in New York City, and I am an actor and theater director, an occasional playwright. And the most troubling thing about religion to me is the fundamentalism that lives behind it, and the radical nature that it draws out. I mean, I could sit here and quote some of the most atrocious passages in the Bible and the Quran, or even the Hebrew Bible, but that's something you can look up on the internet. I am not one who fully agrees, though, with people like Sam Harris and the late Christopher Hitchens on certain issues regarding the function of religion. I am deeply concerned when people like Sam Harris advocate imperialism and even torture of enemies, quote-unquote, of the United States, because I think it oversimplifies the importance of the political nature in the world, and that there is no reason why someone who claims to be a rationalist should have these kind of fundamentalist views in their own kind of way. Now, I'm not at all saying that atheism is religion or one can be a devout atheist or anything of that nature, but I am just concerned when in regards to things like foreign policy, when the United States systematically executes and exterminates hundreds of thousands of Arabs, hundreds of thousands of Muslims, whether they do it in an imperialist nature or intervention like in Iraq, declaring war in Iraq or declaring war in Afghanistan, or whether they're using drone missiles in Yemen or Somalia or Pakistan, or whether they are financially supporting the execution of Palestinians through funding the Israeli government and military. I mean, these are the things that I think are the most concerning to me where atheism, in respect to atheism, because it is only with that kind of animosity toward religion, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I don't disagree with how religion can turn people into extremists and radicals, but I think it's an oversimplification to say that religion is everything. And I know that's not what Sam Harris says, but it is a problem when you become more like your enemy, that you're as a rationalist, because when you advocate things again like torture or like nuclear attacks on a foreign power that may obtain a nuclear weapon, even though there hasn't been an Arab or a Muslim who's used a nuclear weapon, it creates a problem, I think, with how atheism can be seen, or secular reasoning can be thought about, because I do not think that it is rational to bomb people in the Middle East. I do not think it is rational to use religion as a way to justify the persecution and discrimination systematically or individually against homosexuals. I think that this is a big problem that in the atheist movement that we have, because people like Sam Harris, I don't want to say as a self-proclaimed leader, but many people regard him as a leader, and this is a big problem, I think, because people like him seem to have not a fundamentalist view. I don't want to go so far as to say that, but they have been using their intellectualism and their stance as a kind of leader to justify some atrocious actions that are perpetrated and carried out by the U.S. government. And I think that this is a big problem with ideas, about how ideas are thought about and reasoned in the atheist movement. And I am a firm believer that atheism should be about secular humanism. I believe that atheism should be a rejection of theist claims. And I'm not here to argue against Sam Harris's criticism of religion. My criticism here is that Sam Harris is using his intellectual prowess to justify intellectually, the mass slaughter of people in a secular name. And I think that that's a big problem, because if you actually measure the amount of people who have been killed by Muslim extremists and people who've been killed by U.S. imperialism, which can be seen as a Christian supremacist kind of ideology, there's really no contest. I mean, the people who have been massacred by U.S. imperialism is far greater, in far greater numbers. So this is my concern when we're talking about atheists who are being self-proclaimed leaders. And I have a great deal of respect for Sam Harris. I appreciate a lot of his work, especially as a critic and a reasonable voice, but this is a very dangerous territory we step in when we try to throw a blanket over 1.4 billion Muslims, many of whom do not subscribe to Al-Qaeda. And Sam Harris likes to use polls as though that is solid, some kind of solid evidence all the time. And I think that that's tricky, because the polls can be kind of invasive and can kind of, when saying, would you support violence toward anyone who posed a threat to Islam? Well, there's a different interpretation as to what a threat against Islam is. And with one poll he used in a debate against Chris Hedges. So I think throwing a blanket on so many people is kind of a problem. And now, as in regards to, say, late May of 2012, we have seen uprisings, democratic uprisings, in Muslim/Arab countries. And I think that this is giving a great hope to secularism in that part of the region, where we can have things like secular governments in those regions without necessarily having some sort of military intervention in respect to the U.S. The occupation of Iraq failed dramatically. The occupation of Afghanistan is failing dramatically, and it's only radicalized Islamic extremists. And so I think that there is a big problem when we have U.S. military intervention in other countries in order to make them secular or to make them more democratic. I think democracy can only really happen from the bottom up, not from the top down. And it is nowhere near the kind of Al-Qaeda ideology that exists in these countries as Sam Harris exerts, or Sam Harris proclaims. And I think that we're seeing that with these democratic uprisings that have been trying to be violently repressed by their corrupt governments. And that's something that I think is very important to keep in mind when we're talking about the Middle East, that it's not necessarily only a religious problem. I'm not saying that religion isn't a problem here. I think religion is a big problem anywhere in the world. But we also have to look at the social circumstances and the social conditions, the economic exploitation, the social degradation, the political oppression of the masses of people in the Middle East, and that they're now rising up in a democratic fashion in order to state that they want democracy, that they want a more secular government that is not fundamentally Islamic. And the youth in Iran, for example, is some of the most secular in the Middle East. And we're also seeing that in Egypt. While they may have religious views, they do not necessarily believe that the government should be a fundamentally religious entity. And of course, this is subjected to massive debate and massive criticism, but I am someone who fully supports the Arab Spring and fully supports democratic uprisings throughout the Middle East, unlike the United States government, which again is funding the Egyptian military in order to repress democratic voices in the street, or the way they're funding and supporting Bahrain. That's another problem. So as an atheist, as a secularist, as a skeptic, I find it very troubling that there are atheists who are using that label and that name and rationality and secular reasoning in order to justify mass murder. Because in a way, I don't think it's different, but not very different from the way religious extremists either want to kill or do kill people in that name. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.